What do you think Dan Rather and people do just before the camera comes on? Oh! From a certain view, this kind of stuff is not really about to change you, but to change your expectations. Now, step to the side for a minute and consider that this is true even outside TKS. This kind of stuff. But, as always, if you're trying to look beyond the ordinary limits of ordinary stuff, then what I point out has unordinary ramifications and possibilities. But there are ordinary ramifications and possibilities, such as this holds true under ordinary conditions. And to start with, let me ask you this, or you ask yourself. That is, that confused you enough. Not only this kind of stuff, the side stuff was all kinds of attempts and directions to change are not really about changing people, but it's changing their expectations. It's just not seen that way. So in general, I was going to ask you, that's where you're supposed to be. Just how much, in your learned, calm, cold-blooded clinical opinion, just how much, after all, can man's nature, his behavior, the actual structure of life be changed? Now, we'll assume that you haven't stumbled in to see this from nursery school, and that in some way you have at least a nonverbal, certainly not an exclusive, certainly not a real opinionated suspicion that men are not all that subject to change. And so if, as we get into it, that you do begin to see that even those directions, those kinds of institutions, those kinds of activities in the normal scope of life that apparently are involved specifically with telling people how to change, they're not really about that. It's not about having the people change, it's about the people changing their expectations. So if that be true, already you have, what shall we call it? How about a green-tipped mallard? I don't know what to call it. But we have the situation, again, that life has set up one game, outfitted everyone with a rugby shirt and rugby shoes, and then tossed them a hockey puck. Plus only half a book torn down the middle, like some of Burroughs' original writings, like the rules to 8-ball in Swahili, and just toss it out. All of that back to the fact that everyone, we'll assume, should have some clear suspicion, without any particular subjective feeling. It's not pessimistic, it's not sarcastic, but that the whole matter of changing human nature, changing people specifically, changing people collectively, changing people in general, is a quite open question. Shall we leave it at that? Just how much can people change? And if you have some view of that, so that we could tiptoe a little bit further, is how much should people change? Now, from an ordinary city view, of course, everyone's intelligence, just in the middle of the sane curve. That's the bell curve. Just in the middle there is, of course, the feeling that people should change. That's part of being alive. But if people cannot change all that much, just to start off with it easy, then the question, as we're tiptoeing a bit further, of well, how much should they change, takes on a new, if not clarity, takes on a new complexity. That if you're aware, as everyone is, that the question is running through me, the feeling that I should be scratching somewhere. I should change in a certain way. And then you begin to get very clear, cold-blooded glimpses of the fact that change is not all that possible. In spite of the fact that I have been outfitted evidently for rugby and I'm standing here looking at a hockey puck. So not only I feel as though that I should change, but then begin to have glimpses of, for instance, this is not really in line with my attire. I'm not dressed for this game. That is, I feel like I should change, but then I begin to see that I'm not going to change that much, me and everyone else. And then the question is, well, how much should people change? In other words, if this game has already been rigged in some way that life may be in its own quaint way having a belly laugh at someone's expense. I know, not yours. No, no. People somewhere else, foreigners, people we don't, people somewhere else. The Visigoths, they didn't just disappear. They're hiding out because they knew we'd laugh at them. Well, I hate to play with history that much. When they first started hiding out, they didn't know we'd laugh at them, because if we'd laughed at them, it'd have been... It's just now, I guess we could laugh at them, because most of the average people in this part of the world are probably better armed than the Visigoths were. But that's what happens when you hang out and do not keep up with weaponry's advances. But back to the subject. But see, now they can't come out. Now they have to keep playing like that they're... We won't go into it, but... Eskimos. I don't know where they are. The idea of change, back to where I was hoping we were, may I refer you back also to several nights ago we were discussing, and I was pointing out that what seems to be the directions, what seems to be the activities in the city can, for very useful purposes, be classified as either being essential or entertaining, such as the letter that you recall a good viewer wrote me, and before they went any further, the person wanted me to just simply answer, what's the purpose of this? At least I assume that he get took, which I still like. I always have to pause. I don't know the purpose of this, or sometimes they write, won't know what my sign is, or so that they don't put it, but it's so that I will actually know what's going on and will not get took. I still like it. Not good took. And some people ask where the comedian's coming from for tomorrow, and I do not mean me. The purpose, and at the time, if you recall, we were pointing out that you could, for very useful, arbitrary purposes, divide up the purpose of anything. Purpose of religion, education, being drafted, being a father, being a mother, being a citizen. You could divide them all up into that which would be essential, that which would be connected with what we have also artificially referred to as primary, the three S's of sustenance and sex and security, of just that which would, if you were sans intellect and still more or less a civilized, sophisticated, contemporary person, just the kinds of things that would keep you alive, you individually and all of us collectively, then that would be essential. So the question of change, when I say ask you to consider how much can people change and how much should they change. All right, now let's go to the essentials instead of entertaining. Surely you can see any question about change surely cannot have anything to do with the essentials. If it does, you are no longer in the middle, may I say, of the sane bell curve. You are engaged in some form, just from an ordinary view, of mutilation, self-mutilation. Intellectually, emotionally, physically, it doesn't matter. Because there's no question of change in the essentials. What are you going to change? Now remember to divide up from the primary to the secondary world. You may change your dining habits. You can certainly change from going to the place that we all were for a while, the local version of California Nouveau Cuisine, until it became gauche. And of course now we're going somewhere else. But that's secondary. That's a secondary activity of dining, but not eating. If you decide to start playing around with eating, like, well, I think I will quit eating during every year that has a 7 in it. You cannot do that. Or sex. You could change within certain limits. I guess whether when you and your loved one get together, whether you tonight dress up like Popeye the Sailor Man or Queen Elizabeth. let us say it goes no further than that, and you don't actually hurt anybody or offend the royal family in some unforgivable manner. You can play around with that, but humans cannot play around. Now, again, we're not talking about the anomalies. In the middle of the bell curve, people do not play around. You cannot simply decide. And I don't mean when you're 7, then you can't do it anyway, if you're a man. But people cannot simply decide, well, I don't know, sex is a lot of trouble and gets you all sweaty. I think I'll just stop, and I think I'll encourage all my family and my friends to let's quit doing it. You can't do that. Well, you catch the point. Any idea of change, if it was still open to some question that people should change as the DNA of life in us makes everyone believe they should, that is part of the purpose of being here, no matter under what guise it seems to reside in you, whether it be under a religious shell, whether it be under something else. Then, any idea of change, you've got to see, you have got to cut out the essentials. Or it's you're dealing with a form of self-mutilation. You're dealing with suicide. You are no longer part of life's healthy core. You're rotting. So we're not talking about changing sex or sustenance or the security of you, that you decide, well, I will do things that will perhaps get me killed any day now. I think this morning I'll drive down the wrong side of the road all the way to work. So we're not talking about any possibility of change, if indeed we're still talking about the possibility of change, but you're certainly not talking about the essentials. You're not talking about changing anything in the primary world, in the primary activities in you. So then what's left in our arbitrary division? The entertaining, that which is now secondary, or as opposed to, instead of being paleo-primary, into the area that would be neo-primary now, the secondary, that which is, in fact, as you know, if you can get into the area of the infinitely adjacent, the secondary is no longer really secondary. The entertaining is no longer really entertaining. It's primary. But we've got to call it something to differentiate it so that you can begin to map it out yourself and to see it from the paleo, from the original primary, from the 3 S's. So, now that you got all that, you remember. Then we're talking about the entertaining. We're talking about the hobbies. We're talking about the secondary world. We're talking about anything that would not be absolutely essential to keep body and soul together, figuratively speaking. So we're not talking about the essentials. We've got to be talking about the entertaining. And now consider, even in the world of the entertaining, that which would not have a direct effect on the continuation of the race, sex, or whether the continuation of you, the sustenance of keeping you alive, or the other S of the security of keeping yourself within certain environmental tolerances so that you can go ahead and survive and therefore reproduce and et cetera and live to fight another day, if not to argue with James Thurber. In the secondary world, what you end up with what seems to be the possibility of changing in the hobbies, in the secondary world, in the area of entertainment as opposed to the essentials, you have got then again the primary, the historic source of these changes always been religion. And if you tried to talk to religion as an institution, if you tried to talk to religion not as some artifact of society, are we going to have to stop there again? Doesn't everybody like that? But now you should be that kind of attuned to yourself that you hear something pointed out that is beyond question at first blush. That it's pointed out. I mean, it could be, talking about something serious. You might have heard it on the Oprah Winfrey show. A person with a suit on, a person with a degree, a person with a up-to-date haircut. And they point out, well, my life is going pretty well, or my poor patient here, until such and such happened. And she is only one person, but she represents the kind of negative impact that has happened before the feminist movement happened. I'm just making up a good one. She is one of the living victims, the walking wounded of what society has done by having certain negative expectations of women. And if your brain hears it, your nervous system hears it, and it's yes. That is, it happened to this poor woman, or it happened to a large segment of society because of society. They weren't born this way. The woman was not born hating men. No. It was because her uncle would not give her a job when she was a teenager. He had a very good business. Plus, she thinks that he was making goo-goo eyes at her, which I'm cleaning up the way they talk on those shows. And so they point out, it's not her fault. And your nervous system goes, yeah, it's not. I mean, she wasn't born that way. society, if not her uncle specifically, the general mood of our society is such that it holds women down, or it holds down some minority segment. It holds down people who only have 2 ears. And everything about you goes, well, yeah, that's true. No. Well, I stopped myself, so I guess we'll go ahead with it. There is no such thing as society. It's just as clear as hell. If you've got any chance of being able to think in any way beyond what you can think now. Of course, if you're satisfied with what you can think now, then this is purely entertainment and probably fairly low level at that, I'll admit. There is no such thing as society. There is no such thing as any institution, any collection outside of people. There is no Harvard without people. There is no Catholic Church without people. There is no Islam. They simply do not exist. And some of you, I know every now and then when I stop and do this, can go, by God, that's true. That even if the buildings were there and the temples and the churches, if there's no such thing as the military. There's no such thing as the military establishment. Except you hear it. It's not because it's a delusion. It's not a conspiracy by the people involved in the media or in the institutions. It's the conspiracy of life. But you hear the military establishment, you go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And if suddenly I jumped out of your radio after you just heard that and you're going, yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, if you're going, yeah, 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 you knew where it was about to go. The statement they're going to make either of attacking the military establishment or defending it. And you're going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I simply jumped out and said, wait a minute, there's no such thing as a military establishment. That's insane. Because everybody knows there is. I mean, it's not even worthy discussing it. Except for the fact there is no such thing. All right, sometimes some of you get a glimpse of that. It's not all that difficult, or to see that there is no such thing as the church. When you say, well, yeah, there is. I mean, we're right next door to one. I'm a member of it. I'm not in good standing, but my family, my whole country, my nation, my neighborhood, yeah, it's real. And I point out, yeah, but there is no such thing as the church apart from people. And then you can go, well, yeah. Even ordinary people, I assume, I could get a few that go, well, yeah, okay. But then it's gone. But a little trickier is why I went in that particular direction tonight, is society. It's the same crap, same stuff. But it just seems harder because it is used by life as being the ultimate catch-all, the ultimate corporate shell for all institutions, is to say society. Because it's obviously real, it is obviously influential when you point out that this girl, this woman, there could be a man, I just picked this out because I'm normally picking on men, that this woman, here she will admit, we thank you for showing up. We know how much courage it took for you to get all dressed up and come up here to be on national TV and admit these horrendous things that happened to you. We just appreciate it because I know you only came up here so that, and the person says, so that my life and my terrible experiences might be a lesson to others. And Donahue or Jesus or whoever's in charge goes, very good, because everybody knew that's why she's here. Other than the fact that everybody knows she's only there, to show off because you wish you were there. Because millions of people write them and say, hey, that was a horrible thing that woman told the other day. It was on Thursday. Oh, it just tore my heart to pieces. P.S. The same thing happened to me, but twice as bad. Can I be on? And for you people like that, it's got nothing to do with TV. It's got to do with the nervous system of life. It's got to do with the fighting and scrambling of neurons. People. People. And it's pointed out, the woman admits, or they drag it out, but it's no problem to get done. How was your life up until the age of, what was it, when it's 15? Well, I was a honor student in school, and I'd never missed a day in class, and I was a cheerleader. And then this terrible thing happened. And not only happened, but went on for a while before her family found out, before she knew what to say about it. And it's not her fault or his fault. You know whose fault it is? And it's not even necessarily the uncle that did this. Or it's not necessarily the institution. She wanted to join. She was the first woman who ever applied to West Point. And she was heartbroken when they turned her down. And she had a distant relative who at one time lived next door to somebody who knew a U.S. senator. And so they even tried to get him on the case, and he went, hey, this is 1971 or 1965. They don't let women in West Point. Give it up. You're a nice girl. I know your cousin who used to live next to that person that was a kid. Yeah, I remember him. You're a nice girl. Go home, get married, get pregnant. Donahue, or the woman, points out, her psychiatrist there, points out, this was the beginning of the end. Did your life change after that? I understand your grades went way down. They did. I got to where I couldn't sleep. I put on weight. It was like I'd been crushed all my life. I had one dream. I wanted to be the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or at least a bird colonel. I wanted to be part of that long, thin, gray line before I put on these extra pounds. But at any rate, you catch, and that will point out, well, there's no real villain here. There's no real villain. Your congressman even, he offered to help a little. He looked into it. He listened to your story. It was not the head, the commandant of West Point, personally did not single you out. It was just at that time they would not allow any women. That's before we began to become a little more sensitive to the possibilities that women could do other things. Yeah. But notice, we're here discussing the kinds of things because our guest here is not that old, but she is still in analysis. And the woman, she stands there, and she is, besides my apparent little jokes, is reasonable. She's intelligent. She perhaps went on and did get a master's degree from MIT, but she says that her life has never been the same, that the months, almost a year that she worked trying to get into West Point, the first woman, and how they just adamantly, they wouldn't even hear of it, just on the basis of sex. And the audience, and perhaps you sitting there, if you're ordinary, go, and who's to blame? It's not any one person. Nobody singled her out. The head of West Point didn't say, well, we might let a woman in here, but not that bitch. It was nobody's fault. It was society's fault. What else are you going to say if you were intelligent? If you were just in the middle of the bell curve and let other people's intelligence in the city just kind of lead you along, you go, well, yeah, that's true. Except for this. Take everybody out of the city. Where is society? Take all the people. Take all the people off this planet, and just send them on the moon for just a minute, for the example, and then look down and tell me where is society. And of course, there is no such thing as society. You got to have the people back. But notice, still, when it seems apropos to say this was brought on by society, then when it seems apropos by God, it is apropos, because you look, in my example, and there is no human, there is no person, no individual, or even two or three people that they can point to and say, well, they got behind closed doors and they conspired to keep this girl out of West Point, or to keep all women out. No, everybody can pass the buck, everybody can wash their hands, everybody can say, literally, I did not specifically try and do this to this person. I was bound by certain rules. There are certain laws that govern me. There are certain pressures of society. I had no choice. I'm not trying to play some real crude mea culpa. It is simply not my fault. And the next person says, it's not my fault. And you look at it reasonably, and it's not. It was due to society, other than the fact that there is no such thing. Happy birthday, life. I was going to, where we took a little turn, point out that while life has this set up, it still continues to turn out the first stories. And it does it primarily through religions, always has. And the first story is this demanding that people must change, that people have lost their way. And yet, when you begin to see it, the first story will not hold up to any further investigation, because even though the churches, religion, has historically, as opposed to politics looking after the external man, apparently the religions, and now psychology and the social sciences, but religion apparently in charge of trying to direct, mold, help, assist the inner life of man, or as they used to like to call it, the heart and soul. But the first story is that men should change. But any kind of fresh, non-secondary based study of this will show that those very directions are not to demand that men change. It is to change their expectations. The very things, let's take the church, because it would seem to be the still best example, that a church somewhere, a religion somewhere, says, you are not living correctly, and you go, I know it. You being generic. And it says, come join us because we know what to do. I think you do. I'll go through the ritual, and I'll put on the funny clothes like you people, and I'll go through it all so I can be a member. Because you have got to change, or you're suffering now. It's either hell later on, or Dante contemporized right now. Inside of you. People go, yes, all right. You have got to change. Okay? And you join up. You go through a ceremony. You go through some kind of mythical ritual wherein you're apparently reborn into this religion, reborn onto a new path. As soon as you do that, and they shake your hand and say, welcome, brother or sister, then what? Do they demand that you change? If they did, there would be no one in churches or temples. If they demanded that you change, then of course that would begin to sweep through the whole organization, and the first thing you know, I hate to frighten anybody, but they would then be expecting the people running the religions to change. So, hey, they do not demand that you change, except the first story is, it is about change. Is it for people that want to change? Yes. Well, come join us by God because you've got to change. The gods want us to change. But you get in there, and nobody demands that you change. Because what's really going on is not directions on how to change you, it's how to change your expectations. We're going around the long way, I admit, to get back to where we opened up. But what are the change in expectations that the ordinary secondary world, via the urgings of life, has to offer? Well, the expectation that it offers is after it's presented the setup that you feel like you should change. Yes, I do. Well, that's what we're in charge of. Come join us, and you join, and then they do not demand that you change. What they're actually offering is to change, to help change your expectation. So how is that done, you might ask? Life does it through generally what people think of as society, but it comes out more specifically in religions, that it begins to change your childish primary expectations gradual line. It takes your primary childish, and I say that literally, as you're a child, it takes the primary essential expectations. But then they gradually, of course, begin to expand into secondary. That is, you become an adult. That is, you become able to what? No, not play with yourself. Talk! Talk! You start to talk, and then your childish primary expectations, after you begin to talk, turns into, I should change. Don't lose your place. But the ordinary level, again, psychologists, psychiatrists, just your ordinary intellect, if you heard it, would say, wait a minute, this is not natural, because now you're talking about the very sorts of things that a child living, as Rousseau imagined, begins to grow and is a splendid little flowering, pristine little blossom. And what happens? The ogres of sexual repression and all kinds of stuff. From where? Under the bed? No, no, no. Society. Well, their parents. But it's not just their parents' fault. It's the general attitude of society begins to take, let us say sexually, which they love to take, as an example, that the child is wandering around dropping his or her pants, going around to the neighborhood children and pulling open their pants and saying, hey, let's play doctor. Hey, you need a cab to Detroit. And society begins to say, no, 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 no. All right, Remember, this is not me. I'm talking for the city. So it turns the childish expectations. You know, the child didn't. That's before really talk. Even though me saying you want to play doctor, the expectation begins to be changed from trying to look in other people's pants. See, it changes the expectations to you should not do that. Well, yeah, but the child didn't decide that. Who made the child do it? Society. Oh, yeah, it may have been their parents or a teacher said, stop that. But it was society. It was our repressive, backward, sexual attitudes has now put a crimp in that young, horny little kid's sex life. So the expectation now, they don't, of course, analyze it this way, but the expectation has gone from this child's silent, primitive, primary expectations into a new expectation. The new expectation is when he does that, no. So then the expectation is, I got to quit doing that. Then, in this line, this beautiful, gradual line, then comes, to most people, the final, mortal expectation is I should change, and I can't. And now I can feel guilty. Now I can be even more irritated. Do you see that joining up with a religion, they do not demand that you change. They can even infer beforehand. They may not say demand anymore, but that's the feeling. You're hoping they demand it. Why else would you go through dressing up in a silly way and hanging out with people who dress up funny to be serious? Because you assume that in some way you're going to be led, if not forced, in a positive way, to change. But you get in the midst of it and you find out it's not true. Or you should. Or you could. Because it is not to change you, it's to change your expectations. And the final change is to make you feel guilty. Now, that's just a word. And I know that's the kind of word that Oprah and all these other people would use. And I hate to use it, but my God. It is a form of energy. It is part of the spur of keeping humans growing. But it turns out that the expectation has gone from silent, more primary activities wherein you expected primary payoffs that sex gives, that just eating gives. You just eat as much as you want to and belch, and then lay down and pass out. Yeah, that's all right for the Flintstones or somebody. But we are decent people. We have different expectations. I have greater aspirations in life, which are expectations, than to simply stuff my gut and belch and lay down. What do I look like? Well, don't answer that. I am a civilized person. I have greater expectations. No, everyone does if they live in the city. Than that. Or just to get laid. I don't even care particularly who it is. As long as they don't talk and ask me any questions, or ask me my sign, or ask me if I liked it. I'd like to get laid, then I'd like to eat a big meal, and I'd like to belch, and I'd like to pass out where it's either nice and warm or nice and cool, and nobody talk to me, all right? Right? That would be the childish primary expectations. But that will not do. You know that. That's why you're laughing. It's because you were laughing thinking, boy, I wish that would do. But you know it won't. Not around here it won't. That is, not around planet Earth. So the expectation has changed, but one more time I'm going to run through so you can see it. It's a gradual. It's not all that cut and dried, and it's not psychological, and it's not the fault of society unless you can find society. But it goes from that kind of pretty generalized, primitive expectations. Primary, that's what it would be. Essential. That is, you're dealing with expectations that you would have regarding essential matters. Eating, screwing, getting in out of the hot or the cold, taking a nap, being sure not to overexert yourself. So it goes from those expectations to expectations that came from somewhere, didn't they? Society. The expectations from that, as you begin to talk, change to I should change. In other words, I should not be pursuing these kinds of expectations, but not in that way. Just in general, things are not right. I've got to change. I've got to grow up. I've got to do better, blah, blah, blah. Then gradually, again, it all overlaps and dovetails, but then it goes into, but I can't seem to change that much. I've lost my way. I know that I should be on the path somewhere that has at least some sort of sign that says meaningful change, the proper path. But I can't seem to find my way. But lucky for you, there are those around who will say to you, lucky for you, I'm around. Known normally, as I said, as religion. But oftentimes worse than that, your parents. Your friends. Other people. They say that yes, that is our job. That's our responsibility. This institution is to put you on the path to proper change. And you go, good. But you find out that it's not good. Because what it leads to is not change, but to change your expectations even more. Because they've already been changed from primary, silent, in fact childish expectations into expectations that won't do. Just getting laid, getting fed, and resting, I don't know. At one time I thought that was pretty neat. But I see now that will not do. I've got to do better. I've got to do more. I just got to do better. So it's gone from that to I've got to change. To, well, I can't seem to change. To, we're here to help you. So then you join up, put yourself into the bosom of the institutions that say we're in charge of helping you change. But you get in there, and they're not made to demand that you change or to make you change, but to change your expectations a bit more with a certain kind of twist. That is, I want to change. Well, in the fundamentalist religion, if you're thinking that you're missing out of this, the good old idea, the primitive form of Protestantism, and there's other versions. But the feeling of conviction that the fundamental Christians, that I feel it's worse than guilt. I guess they look upon guilt as being some kind of Freudian cheap version that Yankees made up. But good Southern people know it's the conviction. It's God inside of you going, oh, you naughty person, you. Oh. And so it's this conviction. So I've got to do better, and so they want to go and turn themselves over, if not to God, to Jim Baker if he ever gets out. But somebody that says, yes, we're all terrible people. You go, yes, I know. All right, come here and we'll be unterrible. And you get there and you find out it's not to be unterrible. It's in a sense to institutionalize the guilt. That is, it's changed the expectation as far as it's ever going to go. They don't put it this way, of course, but this is the way it works out. That, all right, I had the childish primary expectations, which won't do. I finally see the error of my ways. I am now an adult. Even I read a piece of the Old Testament on a matchbook cover, and now that I'm no longer a child, I put away my childish things. I'm now an adult. I now must be serious and feel guilty and change. And so I try to change, and I go somewhere that tells me how to change, but the ultimate directions they have is simply to change my expectations. My expectations were, please follow this, that I should do these crude things. No. Now my expectation is that I should do better. All right, now my expectation is that I'll find the better way to do it, and I'll do it. But now my expectation is I can't seem to do it, and now I look for institutional help, and so I find it, and I find out that the final expectation is, without them saying it, is you can't change, but you got to suffer over it. You got to want to change, which has got nothing to do with Christianity, it's got nothing to do with any religion. It's got to do with the energy of growth itself. Real change, not the word change, the energy. And so the ultimate is to realize, well, I cannot change, which is another way of saying I am not yet old enough to self-destruct. That is, I cannot change. Another way of saying that means that I'm not going to die right this second. Because if you could change, you would be the end of a statement. You would have put a period on your little episodic existence. If you could actually change, you don't need a pistol. You don't need a knife. You can commit suicide, and they'll never find the wound. That would be change. And so it is not some sort of psychological bruise that we have come up with by me pushing it out in my little gestures about the ultimate expectation. is to see that you cannot change. And even the institutions that say, yes, we're in charge of change, they're not in charge of change. They're not going to make you change. They can't change. They're in charge of changing your expectations to the ultimate. That being, hey, now that you're a member of our group, our religion, we're going to let you on the secret. Yes, the secret is it ain't going to do you a damn bit of good. I mean, so far as change. And of course, they don't put it that way. They would lose their little job. They cannot put it that way. But that is the ultimate change. That is the ultimate secret of the institutions that would appear to be the little box in which the secret information is locked. And the secret information they do have. That is, you can't change. Except they don't even know what it is. And so it comes out as, well, none of us are perfect. Only the gods are perfect, and a couple of Persian carpets I've seen. Machine done, however, I've got to point that out. Because if you're just simply a hand weaver, you're still part of society, and you're prone to do a woof or weave faux pas. There is I was going to call it a curious aside, and since I'm doing the talking, I guess I can call it that. You didn't seem to like the use of the reference to our feathered friends. So I'll call it a curious aside rather than a duck-billed aside. Or it has to do with the intent of words and how expectations work in life. Should I say this is going to get viscid, subtle? Nah. All right, how about this? Another great example, especially for all of us people who are inclined to give some support to the Guinness family. Not in their writings or their books either. The AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, a good institution, prime example. I got off religion for a minute. Here's one that most religions in the Western world, most religions on this planet that know of it, support, verbally approve of. The AA expects, if there's a meeting, for you to stand up. And if you'd say, my name is Phil, and I'm an alcoholic. Now the expectation, it goes without saying, that is, it goes without being seen, it goes without being analyzed, and so I'm going to have to say it for you. To say, my name is Phil, and I'm an alcoholic. That is to be intoned with regret in some form. I mean, it is a confession. It is a self-admitted conviction that I'm an alcoholic. You could take the same, now listen to the words, but what the expectations are of life, and I have not changed the subject, by the way. If somebody stands up and says, my name's Buford, I'm an alcoholic, and I love it. Now, I did not do that to make a sarcastic joke, and I'm not making any comment. I'm just using it in the way they do it in the city. You understand how the general attitude is toward drinking in the city, or being an alcoholic. It's just a form nowadays of either being a sinner, or every now and then it creeps off, and somebody pops up here and there and says, we believe again that we've found some genetic connection between drinking and one's, I don't know, genetic makeup. And everybody in the city more or less goes, say what? You know, it's good for a little write-up in the Milwaukee Journal of Science. And it's forgotten, and next year it pops up again. Everybody goes, no. That's the way the city is right now. But notice, without any sarcasm, my guy Buford, of course, this couldn't happen in life. That's not, but now you should know, because if this kind of thing could happen in life, then I hate to say it, but people could change. But my guy Buford could end up at a meeting. Now, I'm not talking about somebody that's there to be aggressive. Of course, there's no other way to put the example, because if this happened, ordinary intelligence, got no way out, would tell you, well, the guy's there. He's there on a lark. He's there some kind of bet. It's a prank. The guy's drunk. But a guy simply would not show up and sit there in an AA meeting, and they ask everybody, and you introduce a guy, and finally this guy stands up after everybody else has done their bit, and he says, my name's Buford, and I'm an alcoholic, and I love it. All right, I'll refer you back to a chi root. I'll give you the theorem instead of letting the chi root keep it. That is, everybody else wants to remodel, but I want to move. To stand up and to say, I am a sinner. To stand up and say, I want to change, I should change, and I can't change. Or to stand up and to say, and the tacit message being, I regret this. To stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic. That's the want to remodel. That's all first stories are about. That's what all attempts, that's what all ideas of change are, that's already available in the wiring system of man's brain, is to remodel. I know that they wouldn't call it that, but that is the only thing possible, because now I refer you back to what we were already discussing. It would be absolute physical, material insanity. It would be suicidal to try and change the essentials in yours or anyone's life. You surely see that. So any idea of change will open the door again that's possible to change. Any idea to change is then not in the essentials. It's not in those things that are life-supporting strictly, specifically, are life-threatening. It's somewhere else, in the secondary world. So you're not talking about actually tearing down a house, that is you, and rebuilding it. It's not possible. It would be suicidal, literally. If you tried to change that which is, let's for a second, if you might ever see this, if you find any trouble with me calling it essential or primary, if you try to tear down, actually redo what would seem to be one's personality, it would be the same as trying to redo a house. Not remodel it, but to redo it, to rebuild it. To do so, you have got to raise it. You have got to tear it down, no matter, you might like the old house, it might be your grandmother's house, but if you were actually going to change it, the ultimate change, the real change, if you were going to do it on the basis of it being an essential change, a primary change, that is not remodel, not patch it up, but to actually redo it, the idea that, as it comes out verbally in the city institutions, to be reborn, to be born again, to take on a new life, take on a new name, take on some new funny clothes, that you have found the path. That would be, if it were true, if it were not simply a change in one's expectations, if it actually had to do with a change in the structure of the person, in the nature of a man, it would take, it's a fair parallel, it would take the same as you would have to go and raise a house and start all over. That's what you would have doing it to a person. And raising a person, may I suggest, is not exactly parallel when you get down to the actual sentience existence. It's not the same as raising a house, because if you raise a person, then they will not rise again. In other words, if you level a person, they're going to stay level. Do not expect to rebuild on that same spot. Not anything you'd recognize. So you're not talking about, even if it was possible, you're not talking about an actual new structure. All forms of change, though it's not analyzed in this way, it's not seen this way, is talk of remodeling. It's a hobby. Have you ever tried to remodel a house? There is no end to it. And you may stand around and say, damn, I'm so sick of patching this mother up. I wish what I'd have done 10 years ago, I wish I had just torn this thing down and started all over. But now it's too late, or now I don't have the energy. I got too much invested in it. Are we talking about a house or you? Oh, I don't know. All of the ideas, the churches, once you get into religion, and if you put to it this way, no one involved still understands that they're not going to demand that you change, because life knows that people cannot change. Now, I'm not saying that life has nothing better to do than know this kind of crap. I'm just having to tell you this so that we can finish out. We got some tape left. It's not that life knows that you can't change. We're in bad shape if life ever gets around. It has to sit around. The only thing it has to think about is such things as, do you know those little things, those little darlings can't really change? Well, if you didn't like that, Think about how often you sit around in a similar pose like this and thought about all the things that you can't do. Of what benefit has that been? Now, what if life, in some more manifold way, was that bored, that dense, that hard up for something to think about, that it had to think about us, all right, you, all right, us. That would put the fear of God in me, if I had any fear and you had any God. All of the ideas, without them knowing it, are about remodeling, because they do not demand that you move. They do not demand that you build a new house. Are you now a good Jew? Are you now a good Muslim? Yes, I am. I mean, would you die for the directions, for the faith? Yes, I would. Well, of course, you don't have to. Do I have to change that much? Well, I know it sounded like it, didn't it, when you first joined up? Yes, I was hoping so. Did you really hope so? Well, I don't know. I bet it'd be hard to do, wouldn't it? That's the institution we have. Are you going to make me change? Of course, now I'm getting into fairyland, and you ask, well, do you guys actually know how to change? I mean, if I wanted to or if you wanted to? No, but we can all be serious and feel bad together. Plus, every now and then we serve a little wine, we have a little party, and have a little fun. The directions, apparently, the urgings to change or not to change, is to remodel, because that is the only thing that is literally feasible. It is the only thing that would not be suicidal. So you're not talking about real change if indeed it was possible, if we were opening the door again to the possibility. And that was one, I started to say interpretation to that Kairoot, but I'm not going to say that. Of that Kairoot, of that guy that says, hey, everybody else wants to remodel, I want to friggin' move. That is not normal. That is not routine city thinking. Beyond the ordinary, how's this for a mathematical split? The last 5 minutes to get back to the heart where we started. Would that be like a good symphony going on? Hell, it does have 70 minutes, and the climax is 73 minutes. That sounds more like a symphony than it does most contemporary male sexual life. So I read that in a book. So the intellectual foreplay has taken up 55 minutes out of the tape. Beyond what happens in the city, that they are not directing, demanding, encouraging change, even though everything tells you otherwise. They are offering, and the only thing demanded, the only thing expected, is you change your expectation. Outside those ordinary limits, if we were referring to this kind of stuff, then you could look at it, as always, there's got to be some different way to look at it, or you shouldn't even bother to be looking at it. But you could look at this kind of stuff as being the possibility that could release your thinking from those kind of ordinary, life-serving, episodic expectations, such as everything we've been talking about for the last 55 minutes. That we opened up, and I even said that from one particular view, you could say that even this, assuming that you would in some way, just theoretically, expect that this would in some way be different from ordinary stuff in the city. But even this could be seen from one view as not being so much to change you, as to change your expectations. You remember that was the opening salvo. But so now, I was trying to get your attention directed to the fact that that could be much more than the way it sounded at first blush. That is, well, it's just to change what I expect. Because what if you could move your thinking? What if you could free it from all of the ordinary expectations? Not selectively, but all of them. Not try to remodel your expectations, not to remodel the ways in which you feel guilty, the way in which you seem to suffer over what you are, because you're left somewhere between the boundaries of, well, you can't change at all, to, well, if you could change, about the most you're going to do is remodel. somewhere in there, what if you could be freed from all of any shadings between that? That is, all futile ideas of change, all futile ideas that it's possible, or all futile actual endeavors to change, or if you're really good, all futile changes. I mean, if you don't believe, if you can still think that you can change. Because from some external views you can change. A man can change from being a solitary drunk in the gutter to becoming sober, a vehement non-drinker, and join the church. And you can look at him and say, well, that is not the same person. The man dresses now as funny as other people in this temple, and he doesn't drink, got a haircut, so that's change. So if you want to call it change, but to still understand that that change is futile. Now, it wasn't for him, but if you find this to be of a kind of essential entertainment, you got to realize that even that kind of drastic change, were it to happen to you, still wouldn't get the job done. If you don't suspect that already, then you're not a very suspicious person. And I'm proud to be associated with you. But you can look upon this as being a kind of freedom to move from the ordinary life-serving expectations, which is what all expectations are that are induced in people. No matter what it is, whatever you expect, it is life-serving, which it's supposed to be. But what if you could free yourself and that there was some other possibility, which is what everybody's itching about? That you could, instead of remodel your expectations, if you could move them to a brand new neural building site. If it was possible that you could experience your own, if I may steal from religion, since they look what they've taken from us, to your own promised land, your own nirvana, your own heaven. But you can't remodel it. You can't turn what you got into this. You got to move. The expectations have got to be different. Because as long as you're dealing with the ordinary expectations, then you can expect to live an episodic life. You can expect that no explanation satisfies. But in fact, if you could move, I was suggesting the possibility that you might be free to no longer suffer, no longer whine, no longer feel guilty and yucky. You might no longer expect the impossible from other people, from life, and you. That is a change in expectations that may sound simple, but that is a change in expectations that is foreign to all ordinary intellectual life everywhere. Because the only way that that would compute at all verbally to the average city nervous system is, well, you're talking about some kind of nihilistic, atheistic, humanistic, I don't know what, philosophy. God caught again. Except for the fact that if you understood anything at all about the infinitely adjacent, then you've got to be able to get free from that. Think about it, all right?